Welcome back to Mideast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's Press Reviews, where we look at media reports on or opinion pieces covering the Middle East. In the Beirut-based Daily Star, Rami Khouri writes on the Arab Spring, an opinion piece titled "The False Promise of Arab Regime-Led Reform." Khouri starts saying the humiliations and scorn that many Arab leaders heap on the populations seem to have no end. While a few Arab dictators have been toppled or challenged by their disgruntled citizens in the last 3 years, the remaining ones appear not to have learned any lessons and persist in their cruel ways. The writer adds the latest sad example is the president of Sudan, Omar Al-Bashir, has been president for a quarter of a century and has committed just about every mistake and crime that a national leader can commit against his own people. Khouri goes on to say Bashir's misrule and cruelty was capped by his indictment a few years ago by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity in the war in Darfur that has killed and displaced millions of Sudanese. It is important to take seriously the idea that a man with Bashir's track record of grinding autocracy and decades of sustained warfare against his own people can suddenly change and begin implementing a political reform process leading to a more pluralistic or democratic system in Sudan. This approach of feigned reforms from the top has been used by most Arab autocrats during the past decades of rule, and never ever has it resulted in real change. Talk of reform or political pluralism is what Arab dictators do when they feel they are being pressured by their own people, as Bashir these days. Khouri concludes it was not surprising, therefore, that just as Bashir was announcing his move to increase political activity and liberties in the country, the leading opposition Reform Now party has charged that government security agents had detained a leader of its student wing and prevented the holding of a party meeting at a university. Many opposition groups have refused to join the dialogue until all their conditions are met, including moves to free prisoners, end internal conflict, and create a transitional government. Among those refusing the dialogue proposal is the Sudanese Opposition Alliance, a coalition of 17 parties led by the Communist Party. And now let's move to Iraq, where Maliki's use of the Swats against his political partners is being questioned. Omar al-Jaffal writes on this in a brief report in Al-Monitor. In his weekly speech on March 19th, Maliki accused some of the security checkpoints of disrupting traffic to delay citizens and make them resent the government. He called for finding the easiest ways to facilitate traffic and promised to hold accountable whoever is causing traffic jams. Security checkpoints became more flexible in letting vehicles pass through. This prompted the citizens of Baghdad to question the Prime Minister's current interest in this issue, almost 6 years after taking office, especially since the Iraqi media has always addressed it. The writer says, according to an officer at one of the checkpoints, the SWAT forces passed by some of the security checkpoints in Baghdad and arrested the police officers who were delaying the passage of citizens. SWAT forces are accused of carrying out many inhumane acts, such as the Hawija massacre on April 2013. MP Mazhar al-Janabi admitted that the members of the committee are not fully informed about the work of the SWAT forces. None of the security institutions, including SWAT, respect citizens. Iraqis have not received anything from these forces in the past years, but destruction and chaos, he added, expressing his hope that Maliki will not use these forces against political partners. The Ministry of Interior did not return Al-Monitor's calls to respond to the accusation of the officer about the arrest conducted by the SWAT forces. Journalist writer Zahir Musa noted, "We have experience with the recklessness of the SWAT forces in releasing hostages, yet the large number of SWAT members who have died indicates that this military institution is infiltrated by those who were not trained by US forces." And now let's talk to London-based Iraqi affairs and Middle East affairs analyst Zayd Alisa. Thank you very much for joining us on Mideast In-Depth.
Thank you.
A Parliament member, Mazhar al-Janabi, believes none of the security institutions, including SWAT, respect the citizens. Iraqis have not received anything from these forces in the past years but destruction and chaos, that's what he said. And he expressed his hope that Maliki will not use these forces against political partners. Do you agree with MP Janabi?
Well, I do believe that what he's talking about is absolutely baseless and groundless, because the security forces have been going and facing an uphill struggle in dealing with the insurgency, the growing and increasingly violent insurgency that is led by Al-Qaeda and also the remnants of the previous regime, who have been trying to escalate the violence and trying to spark and trigger a sectarian war in Iraq. And we've seen that this violence and the reinvigoration and the revitalization of Al-Qaeda has been actually facilitated by all the arming, financing, logistical support, and even paying salaries to the mercenaries converging on Syria, who are affiliated to Jabhat al-Nusra. And this has been confirmed by the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, when he stated last April clearly and categorically saying that Jabhat al-Nusra is simply part and parcel of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that its leader Abu Muhammad al-Tulani was one of the foot soldiers of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And he has acknowledged and confirmed that all this financing, logistical support, arming has been actually shared between the two terrorist organizations. And we all have heard what has been announced and stated clearly by the New York Times in October last year, stating that most of the funding and arming by Saudi Arabia has actually went to the most extremist and violent groups in Syria, that is Jabhat al-Nusra. So that explains and gives a clear, incontrovertible evidence that the Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda have benefited hugely and has been reinvigorated and revitalized by this arming and funding. So we can clearly see that security forces have been trying to do their absolute best, considering that the Americans also have been refusing to arm the Iraqi army and have left Iraq in 2011, and they have deliberately dismantled all the security apparatus, leaving the Iraqi army in dire need of army and the latest technology, that they have deliberately deprived the Iraqi army from having, despite very serious attempts and continuous attempts by the leadership of Iraq to acquire the most advanced weapons.
Yes. Let's touch a little bit on the status of the Kurds in Iraq. Do you think the upcoming elections will pave the way for better representation for the Kurds in the Iraqi government?
Well, I mean, the representation of the Kurds have been, let's say, a constant variable, because they have a certain number of seats, which is not going to increase. But there is now a more bitter and fierce competition within the Kurdish parties. We've seen that the Kurdish parties, unlike the previous elections, when they have entered the elections as one entity, that is the two main parties, the PUK, which is the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, which was led by Jalal al-Talabani, and the KDP, which is the Kurdish Democratic Party led by Masoud al-Barazani. Now, we've got also the change movement, that is the Goran, and they are also fiercely competing for more seats. But I do believe that the Kurds have been pushing and pressing more recently for a more independent Kurdistan. I mean, they call themselves a semi-autonomous region, which is becoming increasingly behaving more like an independent country. I mean, if we look at the army, which is the Peshmerga, it doesn't receive any orders from Baghdad. The airports, the borders, they are behaving like an increasingly independent country, that is, in terms of not again taking any instructions from Baghdad. Their foreign policy has been increasingly more independent, but more seriously and more importantly, they are relying on their independent infrastructure in terms of oil and gas, and they are trying to establish their own economy, which is independent and less reliant on Baghdad, which all gives the hallmark of an independent country.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Zayd Alisa, for your remarkable contribution with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem.
That was Iraqi affairs analyst Zayd Alisa. And for more updates, please visit Levant.tv. Thanks for watching. I'll be with you again tomorrow.